The obsidian scriptorium of the Carnate Central Synod was a spatial paradox of ancient engineering, a kilometer-high void encased within the living rock of the hegemony's central governance sphere, its atmosphere thick and resonant with the low-frequency hum of countless aggregated data streams, each photon meticulously tracked and categorized by the sentient crystalline matrices that lined its towering, monolithic walls. Within the central aperture, where the gravity-defying scriptorium table floated, a rotating assembly of high-ranking Carnate officials, their multifaceted cranial structures catching and diffracting the ambient light, articulated a palpable tension that was slowly, inexorably, cooling the very air around them into a state of frozen dread. High Elder Kalen, his voice a gravelly, deeply modulated frequency that resonated with the authority of cycles, shifted his upper carapace plates, an unconscious sign of profound intellectual discomfort. The visual representation hovering above the scriptorium table, a ghostly, colossal form of a vessel designated unclassified xenomorphic threat level gamma, was the source of their collective unease. It was a silhouette of impossible angles and a scale that defied standard naval architecture, cloaked in a perpetual, swirling energy residue that the sensor arrays had struggled to penetrate, and the hegemony's leading analysts had tentatively assigned it a designation never before used in living memory: Class 210. The designation is an insult to our intelligence, Scriptor Aryan, Kalen articulated, the words weighted with generations of bureaucratic procedure. A Class 210 designation implies, by the very metrics of the Unified Stellar Cartography Act of the Fourth Era, a sentient, systemic threat originating from a Deathworld whose native environment registers a minimum of 210% lethality above the baseline Carnate homeworld criteria. We speak of an environment that rejects the fundamental tenets of complex organic life, a biome so violently hostile that its very existence is a thermodynamic improbability. Yet you place this designation upon a vessel, a creation of intelligence. I require the full data packet detailing this calculation, not this philosophical abstraction. The Elder's gaze, composed of intricate light-sensitive filaments, settled heavily upon the data analyst. Scriptor Aryan, his form smaller and less armored than the Elder, seemed to shrink slightly beneath the scrutiny. His three primary appendages manipulated the holographic controls with a frantic precision that belied his internal fear. High Elder, the calculation is, regrettably, accurate, and stems not merely from the vessel's perceived offensive capacity, which remains unknown, but from its fundamental structural integrity and the residual energy signature that clings to its hull. We are reading sustained gravitational compression indices and atmospheric containment seals designed to withstand planetary crust pressures, not the benign conditions of interstellar void. The material composition, tentatively designated Etherium-2, is self-repairing and structurally inert to every high-yield energy projection test we have remotely attempted. But the true horror, Elder, is the source of the design. The vessel, provisionally code-named Solus Mortis, the solitary end, does not possess defensive plating, it is its own defense. The data suggests it was constructed not to withstand a hostile environment, but to carry one. The energy signature. It pulses with the faint echo of a hyperviolent, low-orbit planetary core event, a geological catastrophe somehow captured and contained within its drive matrix. He paused, the collective silence of the scriptorium amplifying the sheer weight of his revelation. A Class 210 designation is a measure of the environment. This vessel is an artificial Class 210 environment made mobile. Its origin must be a Deathworld of the absolute highest tier, an evolutionary crucible we believe to be purely theoretical. The silence that followed was a physical entity, heavy with the weight of civilizations that had risen and fallen on the axiom of contained threats. Ambassador Vilas, a representative of the diplomatic and cultural archives, an individual whose professional arrogance was legendary within the Synod, finally broke the tension with a sharp, resonant clicking of his mandibular mandibles. The scriptor is consumed by melodrama. If this vessel originates from a theoretical Class 210 environment, then the species responsible for its construction must be either extinct, or so utterly barbaric that a simple, direct application of our deterrent fleet doctrine would suffice to expunge them from the galactic register. The history of the civilized sentient clusters demonstrates an inverse correlation between technological sophistication and overt environmental hostility. Life that survives such an improbable crucible, a death world of 210%, must necessarily expend all its evolutionary resources on mere survival, leaving none for the higher intellectual pursuit of unified physics or transspatial navigation. They are cave dwellers, High Elder perhaps heavily armored, but essentially primitive. The ship is a derelict curiosity, an archaeological nightmare, nothing more. Vilas's dismissal was laced with the hegemony's deeply ingrained belief in its own inevitable technological and cultural superiority. Kalen turned his gaze, now focused and sharp, towards Vilas. Arrogance, Ambassador, is a far more reliable indicator of systemic failure than sensor anomalies. The vessel is inert, yes, drifting in the veil void, but its very presence challenges the philosophical foundation of our entire security matrix. If a species can arise from such a horror and construct something of this impossible caliber, what does that say about the limits of evolution that we have so complacently accepted? The Solus Mortis is not the only anomaly. He gestured to the floating hologram. Scriptor Arian, project the secondary detection trace. The colossal, dark outline of the Solus Mortis remained, but now, nestled impossibly close to its central hull, a faint, almost imperceptible geometric signature shimmered into view. It was tiny, almost negligible against the bulk of the Class 210 vessel, yet its composition was cleanly articulated, a structured, manufactured object of deliberate design. The Synod's collective attention instantly shifted, the fear of the immense replaced by the mystery of the minute. The secondary signature, Elder, Arian stated, his voice now a controlled whisper, was detected shortly after the Solus Mortis stabilized in the veil void. It is a smaller vessel, approximately the size of a standard carnate diplomatic courier, exhibiting none of the impossible energy signatures of the larger hull. Its drive matrix is conventional, its material composition unremarkable, though unusually resilient for its size. The mystery, however, is its behavior. It has been designated Contact 01. It is not avoiding the Solus Mortis, it is not scanning it from a safe distance. High Elder, it is docked to it. Multiple small access points have been extended from Contact 01 onto the hull of the Class 210 ship. The inhabitants of this smaller craft are not studying the nightmare, they are inside it. A wave of intellectual vertigo swept through the scriptorium. The sheer, audacious proximity to an unknown, potentially apocalyptic artifact of Class 210 origin was an act of madness, an absolute disregard for self-preservation that defied all known logical modeling of sentient behavior. Run the preliminary xenolinguistics data on the external broadcast, Arian, commanded Kalen, his voice now dangerously low, a deep current of unease beneath the surface. The walls of the scriptorium, the sentient crystals, flickered with complex equations and unknown geometric patterns before resolving into a single, simple oral projection. A voice, clear and unaccented by any known galactic language inflection, filled the vast chamber. It was a calm, almost unnervingly neutral baritone, speaking in a structured, complex dialect the carnate analysts had yet to fully decode, a tongue of sharp consonants and fluid, open vowels. Yet a synthesized translation matrix, based on universal constants of mathematical and physical communication, provided the only comprehensible fragment, a repeating loop of self-identification. Contact 01 identifying, designation, taming star, exploration and retrieval craft, affiliation Sol Collective, status operational and engaged in high-risk internal systems calibration, priority non-negotiable, transmission code standard universal frequency, no hostile intent. Please maintain designated perimeter for safety. We are preparing the vessel. The final phrase hung in the air, a statement of impossible banality tethered to an act of cosmic folly. We are preparing the vessel. The Sol Collective, Vilas hissed, his mandibular plates rattling with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. The Sol Collective. The designation references the small, insignificant stellar cluster deep in the galactic fringe, a region deemed archaeologically irrelevant and environmentally marginal. The species that emerged from that star system, they are the ones classified under provisional designation, Homo sapiens, the beings from the planet Terra. The ones whose initial contact data suggested a high level of disorganized internal conflict and an alarming, yet contained, biological frailty. They were given a threat assessment rating of Class 1.2, Elder. 1.2. They classify as a minor technological nuisance with a tendency towards self-destruction, and now they are claiming operational control over a Class 210 existential threat. High Elder Kalen closed his eyes, his consciousness momentarily sinking into the vast, silent sea of carnate hist. Oracle data, the long cycles of empire building, the inevitable, sterile logic of galactic expansion, the classification of every known threat, from the ephemeral energy clouds to the lumbering, monolithic hive minds. This new data point, the casual juxtaposition of the fragile Homo sapiens with the apocalyptic soulless Mortys, generated a systemic error in the carnate worldview, a profound philosophical discontinuity. "Ambassador, your arrogance remains a liability," Kalen stated, his voice now steady, having found the necessary intellectual anchor. "The history of the galaxy is littered with the detritus of empires that mistook competence for fragility. The Homo sapiens were dismissed not because they were weak, but because they did not fit the established metrics of power. They did not project overwhelming force, they did not demand vast resource tithes, and their initial expansion phase was characterized by an unnerving, deliberate slowness. We interpreted this as weakness. We are now confronted with the possibility that it was, in fact, self-control." He turned to a cloaked, silent figure at the edge of the scriptorium table, the chief of the Hegemony's Stellar Defense Corps. "Commander Thelen, the standard protocol for an unclassified xenomorphic threat level Gamma is immediate systemic nullification. Given the human presence, this protocol is temporarily suspended. Prepare an isolation perimeter around the Veil Void sector. Do not fire. Do not transmit. Maintain complete sensory silence. Scriptor Arian, establish a dedicated, secure channel to the Taming Star. Ambassador Vilas, you will compose and transmit the Hegemony's formal diplomatic communication. It must be a masterpiece of controlled suspicion, demanding immediate cessation of all activity and full disclosure of their operational parameters. Frame it as a concern for their safety, not an ultimatum. We are engaging the Deathworld custodians, and we will do so with the caution their impossible audacity demands. We enter the diplomatic phase. Let us see what logic drives a species capable of casually docking with an apocalypse." The narrative tension in the scriptorium did not dissipate. It merely transmuted from political fear into a profound, existential curiosity. The Carnate, an empire built on the bedrock of predictable threat assessment, were facing the ultimate unpredictable factor, a species that treated the most feared object in the galaxy as a project requiring systems calibration. The long silence in the scriptorium was finally broken by the meticulous, cold preparation for first true contact with the species known, in the Carnate's secret internal archives, as the Quiet Ones. The transmission from the Carnate's Central Synod arrived not as a sudden burst of coded energy, but as a meticulously layered and phased wave packet, a hallmark of deep protocol diplomatic engagement, designed to convey both overwhelming technical competence and rigid institutional gravitas. It was received in the cramped, utilitarian command control section of the Taming Star, the human exploration and retrieval vessel that looked, by any galactic standard, less like a starship and more like a heavily reinforced orbital construction tug, its hull scarred and functionally unadorned. Inside, the atmosphere was one of profound, almost meditative calm, a stark contrast to the expected frantic activity of a crew operating in close proximity to a Class 210 artifact. Captain Alara Vance, her posture relaxed yet perfectly alert, leaned against a tactical console that displayed the exterior presence of the vast Carnate monitoring fleet, a dense halo of ships surrounding the Veil Void at the mandated safety perimeter. Their sheer numbers were significant, yet they radiated a disciplined silence, a clear indication of a governing body attempting to calculate the optimal balance between overwhelming force and potential political catastrophe. "The Hegemony sends its greetings, Captain," reported Communications Officer Chen, his hands resting lightly on the console. His voice was a low murmur. "Standard Tier 0 diplomatic protocol, full xenolinguistics package. Ambassador Vilas is the signatory. The message is polite, extremely detailed, and absolutely radiating institutionalized panic beneath the formality. They are expressing profound concern for our well-being, while demanding a full cessation of all activity, immediate withdrawal, and disclosure of the vessel's purpose and our affiliation. They have used the designation, Solus Mortis, internally, but referred to it outwardly as the unclassified xenomorphic threat Gamma, a clear political concession to fear." Vance did not look away from the display of the Carnate fleet. "Their fear is a logical constant, Chen. It's what drives their empire, the need to classify, categorize, and contain. The soulless Mortys defies all three, so they default to formalized aggression draped in diplomatic clot. H. What is the core philosophical query? The core query, ma'am, translated from the Carnate's structured idiom, is this. What logic compels a species of Class 1.2 proven systemic fragility to engage with an artifact exhibiting Class 210 existential metrics? And what is the nature of the preparation you are undertaking that warrants such an impossible risk? Captain Vance straightened, a subtle shift in her center of gravity that communicated a total focus. She was the picture of non-aggression, slight in stature, dressed in simple, functional synth fabric, her expression one of focused empathy. Yet her eyes held the quiet, unyielding depth of a mind that operated on a wholly different scale of priority than the Carnate. Respond to the hegemony, Chen, acknowledge their concern with sincerity, state our full designation again, Homo sapiens of the Sol Collective dedicated to the principle of universal custodianship. Affirm that we understand the extreme threat level of the vessel. Do not use the term Class 210. Use our internal designation, the Great Repository of Final Frontiers. Do not apologize for our presence. State simply that the vessel must be prepared, and only we possess the specific methodology and ethical constraint required for the task. Frame our response in terms of duty and necessary calibration, not risk or discovery. The Carnate mistake audacity for madness. We must show them that our audacity is merely a function of our measured necessity. The response must be polite, non-confrontational, and utterly unyielding. She paused, then added a crucial coda. Include this specific sentence in the final paragraph, translated with absolute precision into the Carnate High Protocol dialect. The preparation of the Great Repository is nearing completion. We are ensuring the safety of the subsequent recipient, who will arrive shortly. To impede this process would be to invite a systemic instability far exceeding the localized threat posed by the vessel itself. Chen's fingers moved across the interface, the human response crafted with an almost surgical precision, balancing profound respect for the Carnate's position with a quiet, terrifying assertion of operational supremacy. The taming star was small, fragile against the backdrop of the hegemony's fleet, yet its message carried the weight of a planetary core. In the obsidian scriptorium, the human reply was met not with outrage, but a deepening, corrosive confusion. Ambassador Vilas, expecting a predictable diplomatic retreat in the face of hegemony force projection, found himself grappling with a conceptual framework that seemed deliberately obtuse. Universal custodianship, Vilas repeated, the synthesized translation projected with a bewildered resonance into the scriptorium. What manner of self-applied, absurd mandate is this? They speak of duty in relation to a Class 210 vessel, a weapon of potentially infinite destructive capacity. They have dismissed our threat assessment, High Elder, by renaming it a Great Repository. This is not diplomacy. It is a calculated provocation masked by a spiritual abstraction. High Elder Kalen watched the scrolling data feeds, his analytical circuits grinding against the unexpected logic. Their choice of terminology is significant, Ambassador. A repository implies storage, not offense. Custodianship suggests a delegated or inherited responsibility, not a conquest. They are claiming a relationship with this artifact that is one of stewardship, not ownership. And their assertion of necessary calibration, this speaks to technical mastery that we initially dismissed. They are not merely touching the soulless Mortys, they are fixing it. Scriptor Arian, however, had focused on the concluding sentence. He brought the specific phrase to the fore, translating it again, his voice filled with a tremor of pure intellectual dread. We are ensuring the safety of the subsequent recipient who will arrive shortly. Elder, this is the crux. The soulless Mortys, the Class 210 Deathworld ship, is not being prepared for them. It is being prepared for another, and this other is arriving soon. And they believe that interfering with their work will cause a systemic instability far worse than the vessel itself. They are treating a potential existential threat as a complex delivery package that we are on the verge of accidentally shattering. The realization hung in the air. The Carnate hegemony, an empire whose entire existence was predicated on the ruthless classification and elimination of systemic risk, was facing an unprecedented scenario. A minor species, deemed irrelevant, had taken custody of the greatest threat ever detected, and was now calmly demanding that the great Carnate Empire stand down for the sake of an unknown third party. Commander Thelen, Kalen addressed the silent military chief, analyzed the term systemic instability within the context of the Carnate's own Historical threat modeling. What level of potential conflict are they referencing? Does this suggest a third, unknown power is being brought into this sector? Thelen's response was immediate and utterly devoid of emotion. The term systemic instability, when referenced by an entity operating on the principle of universal custodianship, suggests a threat that transcends localized conflict. It implies a danger to the very structural and political equilibrium of the established galactic network. It is the language of a species that believes it possesses a defense mechanism against a scale of threat that the Carnate does not even officially classify. They are not threatening war. They are threatening the accidental release of something we cannot comprehend. The logic is perverse. They are asking us to trust their judgment on an apocalypse. The long, agonizing debate that ensued in the scriptorium was a slow-motion collapse of Carnate xenophilosophy. They debated the human psyche, the inexplicable calm, the ethical structure that allowed them to take on such a burden, the cold, hard logic beneath the soft exterior. Vilas argued for a swift, overwhelming military demonstration, a non-lethal, high-energy pulse to disable the taming star and allow a boarding team to secure the soulless Mortys. Arian countered that the humans had explicitly warned of systemic instability upon interference, and that the risk of prematurely triggering whatever contained energy matrix the soulless Mortys housed was statistically unacceptable. Kalen, watching the rotating hologram of the small human tug pressed against the colossal, menacing dreadnought, made the final, profound decision. We choose patience. Commander Thelen, prepare a single-armed, high-protocol diplomatic vessel. Ambassador Vilas, you will personally make the approach. The primary objective is no longer the vessel itself, but the nature of the human commitment. You will ask a single question, Vilas. Not about the ship, not about the threat, but about the recipient. Ask them why they believe a species from a marginal world is uniquely qualified to prepare an engine of ultimate environmental hostility for a third party. We must understand their ethics, for it is clearly the source of their power. Ambassador Vilas's diplomatic vessel, the Concordia Stellaris, was a marvel of Carnate technological finesse, its hull a mirror-sheen of refractive stealth polymers, designed to project an image of controlled authority and sophisticated superiority. As it drifted into the immediate, silent proximity of the taming star and the great, brooding silhouette of the soulless Mortys, Vilas felt a shiver of true, unclassified dread. The colossal Deathworld ship was inert, yet it radiated an environmental pressure that seemed to flatten the surrounding space, a sense of deep, compressed violence waiting for an external trigger. The human vessel, in contrast, seemed pitifully small, almost swallowed by the shadow of the behemoth. Vilas transmitted the protocol request for visual and oral communication, a formality that he hoped would underscore the chasm in status. Captain Vance appeared on the Concordia Stellaris's primary screen. She was, as expected, calm, her expression neutral, devoid of the deferential fear Vilas was accustomed to receiving from minor species. Captain Vance of the Sol Collective, Ambassador Vilas of the Carnate Hegemony. We have authorized this close proximity engagement to facilitate a deeper understanding of your current operational parameters. We are operating solely under the principle of mutual security. Vance nodded slowly, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. Ambassador, your presence is noted. We appreciate the caution. Be advised, external calibration procedures are ongoing. Maintain a distance of 3 standard-length units from the taming star's hull to avoid exposure to the residual energy field of the repository. It is currently operating at a contained output level. Direct exposure is not recommended. Her tone was that of a foreman calmly advising a visitor on a construction site, utterly failing to convey the cosmic stakes of the situation. Vilas found the casual warning infuriating. Captain Vance, your advice is acknowledged. I will dispense with the protracted diplomatic exchange. Your people, Homo sapiens, are a species whose environmental and evolutionary metrics, by our established galactic standard, define you as fragile. You evolved on a planet that, while volatile, ranks substantially lower on the lethal scale than the theorized homeworld of the soulless Mortys. Yet you claim the mantle of custodianship and undertake this catastrophic risk. We require the philosophical and logical basis for this impossible decision. Specifically, we require full disclosure regarding the recipient for whom you are preparing this repository. Vance's gaze remained steady, reflecting none of the Carnate's intrinsic need foe. Our categorized, aggressive logic. Ambassador, Your metrics are based on a misunderstanding of the fundamental nature of Deathworlds and the consciousness that arises from them. You measure lethality by planetary pressure, temperature variance, and atmospheric toxicity. These are crude, external criteria. We measure the lethality of a Deathworld by the intensity of its internal, systemic conflict and the philosophical endurance required to transcend it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying a profound gravity. The Carnate believe that life from a hostile environment must necessarily evolve into a species of aggressive, physical might, driven by the need for survival at any cost. We believe that is only the first stage. The true test of a Deathworld species is not its ability to kill, but its capacity to control the desire to kill, both internally and externally. We are fragile, Ambassador, in your definition. Our physical forms are inefficient, our life cycles short. But we emerged from a world where we learned to weaponize not energy or metal, but concepts, ideology, fear, and self-annihilation. We invented existential dread before we invented interstellar travel. The true Class 210 lethality is not in the planet's atmosphere. It is in the mind of the creature it forges. Vance paused, allowing the philosophical weight of the statement to settle. We survived that internal conflict. We transcended the need for constant, systemic violence not because we were stronger, but because we were forced, by the sheer terror of our own self-destructive capacity, to become ethically meticulous, profoundly logical, and deeply, defensively calm. We learned that the greatest weapon is restraint. This, Ambassador, is the true meaning of a Class 210 evolution. Her eyes swept across the vast, looming presence of the soulless Mortys behind her. The great repository, the Deathworld ship, is not a vessel of war. It is an artifact of the first sentience, an ancient species that preceded the formation of the Carnate hegemony by uncounted eons. They were the ultimate Class 210 species, the very definition of a civilization that achieved cosmic power, yet failed the internal test. They nearly shattered the galaxy with their final war, a conflict of pure ideological weaponization. The soulless Mortys is their ultimate creation, a fully self-contained, mobile planetary core designed to generate a temporary, localized singularity, a weapon of last, desperate resort. It was abandoned, drifting, filled with the self-inflicted wounds of a species that failed its ethical imperative. The Carnate are politically and institutionally structured to manage external threat. We are structured to manage internal, catastrophic self-destructive potential. We are the only species in this galactic cluster with the cultural memory and ethical protocols necessary to safely deactivate, reconfigure, and contain a weapon forged by pure, existential self-hatred. We do not do this because we are powerful, but because we are uniquely, existentially terrified of the darkness that we ourselves once conquered. Vance took a breath, the small action conveying a vast history of internal struggle and eventual mastery. The recipient Ambassador is not a new species, nor a political entity. The recipient is an anomaly. The Carnate have classified the recipient as the Void Weavers, a species of immense, non-material consciousness that lives only in the deep space veil void, a form of life that you have deemed ecologically irrelevant because they possess no exploitable resources and exhibit no aggression. They exist solely as a passive, silent archive of cosmic data. Their existence poses no threat, and thus your empire ignores them. However, the catastrophic energy released by the first sentience, final war, the very conflict that created the soulless Mortys, generated a localized, hypertemporal anomaly, a rent in the fabric of spacetime within the veil void. The Void Weavers have been using their entire collective consciousness to hold this anomaly stable, a self-sacrificial act to prevent a localized cascade effect that would shatter the navigation matrix of the entire galactic cluster. They are the silent custodians of cosmic order. Vance's expression became one of intense, quiet reverence. The Void Weavers are reaching the limits of their endurance. They are not physical. They have no ability to manipulate physical space. The soulless Mortys, the great repository, is not a weapon for them. It is the only known physical vessel in the galaxy that can be recalibrated using its contained core energy to generate a localized, benign, inverse gravitational singularity. We are preparing it to be their mobile anchor, a stabilized physical platform that will allow their collective consciousness to continue containing the anomaly without sacrificing their entire existence. We are not arming them. We are providing them a life. Raft forged from the ashes of the greatest evil. She concluded, her words slow and deliberate. We were ready for this. We found the schematics and the residual cultural memory of the first sentients not because we were looking for power, but because we were looking for the limits of self-destruction. We found the key to the ultimate weapon because we understood the mind that built it. We are preparing the Deathworld ship for a species the Carnate deemed harmless, to allow them to maintain a cosmic stability the Carnate did not even realize was at risk. Our mission is not to conquer space, Ambassador, but to clean up the philosophical debris left behind by those who conquered themselves. Ambassador Vilas returned to the Obsidian Scriptorium in a state of deep, intellectual trauma. The journey back aboard the Concordia Stellaris was a blur of silence, his highly ordered Carnate mind attempting to reconcile the two impossibilities presented by the human captain: the concept of an empire built on ethical restraint, and the revelation of a silent, cosmic threat being held at bay by a passive, non-material species. He found Kalen and the Synod not in the centralized debate aperture, but gathered around a secondary display, a deep space projection showing a subtle, almost invisible ripple in the veil void, the location of the suspected temporal anomaly. Carnate long-range sensors, alerted by the human data, were now able to detect the minute energetic bleed-off that indicated a systemic strain on the surrounding spatial fabric. The human data is empirically sound, Ambassador, High Elder Kalen stated, his voice stripped of all former political modulation, raw with the shock of discovery. Our deep field analysis confirms the existence of the temporal shear. The energy required to maintain its containment, even at this quiescent level, is astronomical. The Void Weavers, they were always there, a benign statistic in the background noise. We dismissed them because they offered no threat and no advantage. Now we discover they are the silent bulwark of galactic navigation. Vilas felt the foundation of his entire diplomatic career crumble. Their logic, their ethics, it is a weapon far more potent than the soulless Mortys itself. They are not expansionists. They are custodians. They are not driven by fear of others, but by fear of themselves, and that fear has paradoxically forged them into the only species capable of solving a problem of this cosmic scale. We judged them on their biology, Elder, and they judged themselves on their philosophy. The Synod spent the next 5 cycles in a state of suspended animation, observing the humans. The taming star remained docked to the immense hull of the soulless Mortys, a tiny, tenacious life form performing surgery on a slumbering giant. The human crew, transmitting only technical status reports devoid of any emotional content, worked with a cold, almost inhuman efficiency, recalibrating the internal core. Carnate analysts monitored the energy fluctuations within the Class 210 vessel, watching as the humans systematically stripped away the weaponized intent of the first sentients and repurposed its colossal, contained power source into an engine of stability. The methodical, unhurried precision of the human effort was a display of technical and psychological mastery that rendered the Carnate fleet's overwhelming presence utterly irrelevant. Finally, after the required cycles, Captain Vance transmitted a single, short message to the Carnate command. Calibration complete. Repository online, preparing for recipient transfer. Kalen, on behalf of the Carnate hegemony, responded with an unprecedented short communication. The Carnate hegemony offers full, unrestricted support and operational silence. We await the conclusion of your mandate, custodians of Sol. It was the first time the hegemony had officially acknowledged the humans' self-applied title. What followed was the most profoundly moving and philosophically unsettling event the Carnate Scriptorium had ever witnessed. The great, dark mass of the soulless Mortys, the engine of ultimate self-destruction, began to move. It did not use explosive drives or violent energy bursts. It simply floated with a deliberate, smooth gravitic efficiency towards the temporal shear in the veil void. As the vessel approached the shimmer of the anomaly, the Void Weavers appeared. They were not ships, nor individuals, but vast, nebulous, multispectral forms of energy that had previously only been registered as harmless background radiation. They coalesced around the soulless Mortys, not engulfing it, but embracing it, a silent, cosmic communion. The ship that was once the ultimate expression of self-annihilation became, in that moment, the ultimate expression of salvation. The Carnate sensors, operating at peak sensitivity, registered the final, crucial step, as the Void Weavers integrated their collective consiu. SNES with the repurposed core of the Class 210 vessel, the soulless Mortys did not fire a singularity weapon. It simply activated its contained core, and with an imperceptible shift in localized physics, began to emit a benign, stable, inverse gravitational field. This field wrapped around the temporal shear, not dissolving it, but anchoring it, holding the chaotic rent in spacetime in a state of permanent, predictable suspension. The temporal anomaly stabilized. The faint, high-frequency energy bleed-off that had strained the fabric of space vanished. The threat to galactic navigation was over. The Void Weavers, now anchored, did not vanish. They reformed their collective, non-material consciousness around the vessel, turning the colossal, dark silhouette into a floating, silent monument of life-saving stability. The Deathworld ship had become the most important beacon of peace in the galaxy, a silent, unmoving guardian. The taming star detached, its mission complete, and began a slow, deliberate vector away from the scene, its hull still scarred and unassuming. The subsequent diplomatic and political shift was tectonic in its force. The Carnate hegemony, founded on the principle of predictable threat assessment, was forced to confront the absolute failure of its foundational philosophy. High Elder Kalen immediately called for an unprecedented, prolonged period of internal reflection, the Great Scriptorium Reevaluation, a philosophical overhaul of the Carnate worldview. Ambassador Vilas, humbled and philosophically reborn, was designated the permanent High Ambassador to the Sol Collective. His first task was to secure a formal, permanent alliance, offering the full, unreserved military and scientific support of the hegemony to the human species. The humans, in turn, accepted the alliance with the same unnerving calm with which they had conducted their cosmic retrieval operation, not with triumphalism, but with a statement of shared duty. In the first official, high-level meeting between the Carnate Synod and the Sol Collective's newly established diplomatic council, a group of individuals chosen not for political clout, but for their demonstrated ethical fortitude and calm logic, High Elder Kalen posed the question that haunted his entire civilization. "Custodians of Sol," Kalen articulated, his form bowed in a gesture of profound respect. "You have demonstrated a capacity for ethical constraint and systemic competence that exceeds the combined wisdom of this hegemony's long history. You willingly undertook a task of impossible danger for a species that offered you no tangible reward, all based on a philosophical commitment to universal custodianship. We understand the logic of your action, but we fail to comprehend the origin of your commitment. Where did the Homo sapiens find the will to define their existence not by what they could conquer, but by what they felt compelled to protect?" Captain Vance, now a member of the Diplomatic Council, was the one who answered, her expression imbued with the quiet sorrow of a species that had seen its own end and chosen a different path. "Elder Kalen, the answer is simple, and it resides in your initial assessment of us. We are, by all metrics, a fragile species. We live on a Class 1.2 world that nearly destroyed us not through geological or atmospheric malice, but through the deliberate malice of our own political and ideological schisms. We pushed ourselves to the brink of total, self-inflicted annihilation on multiple occasions. We stood on the edge, looking down into the abyss of non-existence, and we saw with absolute clarity that the only thing protecting us was the thin, tenuous shell of our own fragile, nascent ethics. We were the weapon and the target simultaneously. We survived only because we were forced to evolve beyond the concept of a zero-sum conflict. Our understanding of a death world is unique, Elder. For us, a death world is not a planet that kills you by fire or ice. It is a planet that gives you the choice to kill yourself and then demands that you evolve the wisdom to refuse. We realize that technological power is easy to acquire. Ethical wisdom is the true measure of a successful civilization. Once we conquered our own internal darkness, the darkness of the external galaxy became merely a problem of physics. We became custodians because we knew, intimately, the cost of a species that fails its ultimate ethical test. The Solus Mortis was not a threat to us. It was a mirror. We did not prepare the vessel for the Void Weavers because it was heroic. We did it because we understood the philosophical necessity of cleaning up the debris left behind by a species who, like us, achieved ultimate power, but unlike us, ultimately failed to master themselves. We protect the galaxy, Elder, not because we are stronger than it, but because we are terrified of the monster we once were, and we refuse to see that same monster resurfa. See, in the cosmos, custodianship is not a mission, it is a defensive reflex born of self-knowledge. The deep silence that followed this declaration was not one of confusion, but of profound recognition. The Carnate hegemony had encountered a species whose greatest power was its absolute acceptance of its own frailty and past failures, an honesty that allowed them to operate outside the endless cycle of fear and aggressive classification. The alliance forged between the Carnate Hegemony and the Sol Collective, now officially designated the Custodial Pact of Sol, swiftly became the single most stabilizing force in the galactic cluster. The Carnate provided the logistical strength, the vast fleet resources, and the centralized bureaucratic efficiency. The humans provided the strategic philosophy, the ethical framework, and the unnervingly calm, long-term vision. The Carnate learned to look beyond immediate threat assessments, and the humans gained the resources necessary to continue their unique brand of cosmic maintenance. The Solus Mortis, anchored in the Veil Void and quietly protected by the Carnate fleet, stood as a constant, silent testament to the shift in galactic philosophy. Cycles passed, and the peace that settled over the Carnate territory was a deeper, more resonant quiet than the political stagnation that had preceded it. It was a peace built not on fear, but on shared, acknowledged duty. Then came the final, systemic shock, the culmination of the existential philosophical shift. It was delivered not through a diplomatic channel, but through the Void Weavers themselves. The immense, repurposed vessel, the Solus Mortis, the silent anchor of the Veil Void, suddenly began to radiate a new, complex energy pattern. It was not chaotic. It was a rhythmic, highly structured pulse emanating from the Void Weavers, now using the massive, repurposed power of the Deathworld ship as an amplifier. The pulse was an ultra-low frequency wave, impossible to detect with standard arrays, but easily received by the sensitive human sensor platforms used for deep space cartography. The signal was brought directly to a joint Carnate-Sol command center, projected as a spiraling, beautiful geometric pattern that represented a mathematical language far older than any current civilization. Human linguists and Carnate physicists worked in an intense, combined effort, cross-referencing the signal with the cultural debris found within the Solus Mortis from the first sentients. Ambassador Vilas and Captain Vance stood side by side as the final, confirmed translation was brought forward. The message was a profound, single statement, a beacon transmitted through the new, stable anchor of the Solus Mortis. It was a message that transcended time and conflict, sent from the Void Weavers, the ancient, silent custodians who had been guarding the secret for eons. The message was a simple, stark geometric signature, translated by the final human Carnate cross-analysis matrix into a single, terrifying truth. We are not the only ones, the great dark waits. The stellar core builders are stirring on the edge of the unmapped gulf. We require assistance. The Void Anchor has held the tier, but the Veil Void contains a message for the custodians of Terra. The threat you once faced internally, self-annihilation, is externalized on a cosmic scale. The stellar core builders, they have perfected the weapon you feared, a sentient black hole. They are not coming for conquest. They are coming for self-destruction on an infinite scale. Find the ancient frontier, custodians of Sol. The repository was only the first key. There are others. The projection in the command center shimmered, the geometric pulse vanishing, replaced by a single, final line of human-translated text. They are waiting for a species that is not afraid to break itself to save the whole. The command center fell into an absolute breathless silence. The sheer scale of the twist was a physical weight. The Solus Mortis was not the threat. It was a tool. The Void Weavers were not the recipients. They were the messengers. The humans' accidental discovery and subsequent ethical commitment had not merely solved a localized galactic problem. It had positioned them, and by extension, the Carnate Hegemony, as the only logical response to an intergalactic threat of incomprehensible magnitude. The philosophical lesson learned from conquering self-destruction was now the only defense against a new, cosmic form of self-annihilation. Captain Vance turned slowly to Ambassador Vilas, her face calm, but her eyes reflecting a profound, new acceptance of duty. The Carnate Hegemony, Ambassador, possesses the largest collection of logistical resources and fleet capacity in this cluster, she stated, her voice steady. The Sol Collective possesses the only philosophical framework capable of comprehending a threat that is not driven by resource acquisition, but by an urge for ultimate self-annihilation. Our original mission statement was universal custodianship. It seems the universe has just ratified the designation. Vilas looked at the silent display, then at the human captain. The fear was still there, but it was now a focused, cold terror transmuted into purpose. The arrogance of his old empire was dead, replaced by the deep, unyielding respect for the fragile species that had mastered its own heart. Custodians, Vilas responded, his voice resonating with a new, sober conviction. The Carnate Hegemony stands ready. We will initiate the deep space probes toward the unmapped Gulf immediately. We will dedicate the entirety of our resources to this new purpose. Lead us, Homo sapiens. Show us how a species that nearly destroyed itself learned how to save a galaxy. The shadow of the soulless Mortys, a symbol of the old danger, now protected the genesis of the new, necessary alliance. The long, silent watch of the custodians of Sol had just begun its infinite cycle, and the Carnate hegemony was no longer an empire of conquerors, but a partner in the endless, terrifying maintenance of existence. The fragility of a single, marginal world had become the bedrock of cosmic endurance.